someone appointed me as editor of the school annual book. And I've been pasting pictures in books ever since. And here are some examples. You don't need to pass them all around. You can pass, everyone gets a book. And my wife and I started out in leadership meetings promoting family night fun. And these are two books that were taken up by, originally published by Deseret Book, and then republished by Prentice Hall in New York. Family Night Fun and the Family Book Fun. There was also one that was put out by Deseret Book. This is an example of what we did to, Shirley and I would take one or two of our children and go to England or Denmark and take pictures of the villages that our ancestors lived in. And then we came back and put them into text and pictures. You can pass that one on there. This one is still loose. The Booth ancestors, English villages. But you can just pass it around and see it. Well, I should start out by saying I was blessed with goodly parents and a mother who was a second generation Denmark woman, and a father who had been a mission president in New Zealand. I was called on a mission to England, the British mission, in September of 1939. Now, if you remember what happened then, World War II started. And it was very evident in England. They were having daily raids from the Nazis, and the British conceived of the idea of putting up barrage balloons. They'd have a steel wire attached to a barrage balloon at a height that forced the Nazis to bomb from a greater height and thus destroy some of their accuracy. Otherwise, they would run into one of these steel wires and did, and they'd collapsed the airplane. My mission president was Hugh B. Brown, who later became general authority and in the first presidency. He was a genius. We were waiting for a ship to be big enough to take the missionaries all back to the States. And so during the time we were waiting, he organized the missionaries into districts and said each district is responsible for making a presentation during our time of waiting. He had a good sense of humor. He said, I make just one stipulation. And that is that Elder Lewis must sit on the back row because I don't want him sneaking up and saying a closing prayer before time. Some great testimonies were given during what President Brown spoke of as the School of the Prophets. He wanted us to take upon ourselves to give a gospel topic that would represent what our point of view is on the gospel. And some mighty fine presentations were made. I was transferred back to the Northern States Mission with headquarters in Chicago. And I had the experience of having the mission president, Leo J. Muir, whose compilation of sayings and small talks, like for 2.5 minutes talks then in Sunday school. So when I first met President Muir, I presented my copies of Flashes from the Eternal Semaphore, one of his books, and the other, The Thesaurus of Truth, and asked him if he would autograph them for me. He said, "You've just written your ticket to be a district president." He first sent me to a small village of Farmer City, Illinois. Since I was fresh from London and the bombings and the barrage balloons, I thought it might be a good idea to tell the local school that I am available to talk about the war in England. And so I got signed up for every school class in Farmer City to speak about my time in England and incidentally to say why I was there as a Mormon missionary. Well, I had a good time after that because the kids on the street would call out to me, "Hello, Reverend Paxman." I didn't get that title. They made it up. But it was a great experience. We had a substantial membership of members from Kentucky who had moved up to Farmer City to be closer to the church. And we had very interesting times in dealing with the stories of what missionaries faced in a small Kentucky town. We'll fast forward a little bit. In Cleveland, which I was transferred to as district president after about 3 months in Farmer City. But I had a maverick as a companion, and he thought he had one, a maverick. I wanted to be out proselyting every day, all day, and holding evening meetings. And he said, "We don't do that way in Cleveland." I said, "Well, I hope to convince you we can." And eventually he came around. He brought his Volkswagen cabriolet, he called it. It was a folded back top, and he brought that to Cleveland with him so he could get around, and we did. One of the odd things that I presented to him was that my older brother had recommended that I take my tuxedo with me and attend concerts. So I did. And I couldn't always get, by the name, the elder was named Ace Calder. It was really Acel, but he went by Ace. I invited him to go to concerts with me. We were housed in an apartment just walking distance from the Symphony Hall in Cleveland. So it was very, very handy. I made good friends at the concerts. They always wanted to know what I was doing in Cleveland, and I explained what I was doing as a missionary. And they'd want to know about the church and how much I was paid, and I told them, we do this on our own. We pay our own expenses, and buy our own food. And so many fine contacts were made from my tuxedo symphony concerts. I finally found out that I was out of place in a tuxedo, so I stopped wearing it. Even a hard-headed missionary can get a few hints. We had a branch in Youngstown, Ohio, which was right on the border of Pennsylvania. And when the mission president was visiting us, I introduced a fine sister who was really the heartthrob of the branch. And I mentioned that she was also president of the Sunday school. He said, "Elder Paxman, isn't that a priesthood calling?" I said, "It is if you have priesthood to call." He said, "Well, it's okay, but don't ordain her an elder." So he had a sense of humor. I had an older brother who was a member of the FBI, and he was transferred to Pittsburgh, which was just an hour away from our nearest branch, Youngstown. So I wrote to President Muir and asked him if it would be okay if I went out of our mission for an hour's drive and visited with my brother, because he said he couldn't visit a missionary out of his district. So I went over and had a fine visit with my brother. We had I guess you'd call them a bunch of rural members that were they really spoke in a very hillbilly style. And I asked one of the missionaries to train them in the English language if they would accept him. And they were very highly accepting of him, because being from Kentucky and now in a place where American English is spoken, they recognized that their speech betrayed them. They were embarrassed with their hillbilly language. So that missionary did a great job teaching them to speak proper English. I think branch was called East Liverpool, Ohio. And it was a center of potteries. Apparently the soil, the clay there was ideal to make dishes and pots and pitchers. And so we had a source for seconds that we could buy for very little and stock up on fine pottery dishes. Back to Chicago. Well, let's see. Back to Detroit first. President Muir had organized all of the elders in Detroit to form a chorus and go out and sing to clubs and schools and radio stations. They called themselves the Mormon Male Chorus. And President Muir said that the man who has been their spokesman and master of ceremonies for their concerts was being released, and he was calling me to go and be the master of ceremonies for the Mormon Male Chorus. It was a great calling. We had a rich mix of elders who provided good stories to tell in introducing the Mormon Male Chorus. While there, I met the branch president, whose name was Van Grant. He was president of the Grant Financial Enterprise. He took me aside one day and said, I recently bought in Wichita, Kansas, an aircraft factory, Culver Aircraft. I would like you to go down there and take a lowly position and work yourself up until you're president of the company. And I said, do you have a timeline on that? As well, you've got a little over a year left in your mission. I said, well, don't expect me. I'll enjoy learning the aircraft business, but don't hold me to becoming president of the company. Interesting part of that was that Culver Aircraft built a tricycle landing gear, all wooden, plastic, thin plywood on the body and wings. And I soon learned that the Navy moved in, and they were going to install a system of valves that could be controlled by radio. So the radio control was like a stick on an aircraft. If you wanted to turn left, you'd put the stick left, and it would lower the left wing and turn the rudder for a left turn. I soon learned that our planes were made to be shot down by anti-aircraft guns and by pursuit pilots. And when I told that to my draft board back in Provo, they were not impressed. Said, "You mean you're making planes that are going to be deliberately shot down by Americans?" I said, "That's right." But they gave me a deferral anyway. We employed a woman test pilot because she would be lighter and could sit beside the autopilot valves and hold her hands in the air to prove that she wasn't operating the controls. And a fellow on the sidelines was pressing the key forward to increase the velocity of the plane, while the test pilot was holding her hands in the air, and all of us were holding our breath and wondering if she was going to, if he should really take off. Well, it did. She used all of the runway and took off in that airplane, circled the field a couple of times, and then the real test. Can you land a tricycle airplane and put on the brakes soon enough to use up the runway? Well, she held her hands up, and they did put on the brakes, and she was relieved, and all of us were relieved. So this would be one of the first drones that could fly a person or fly by itself from a plane going alongside or from the ground. So we took part in creating the first drones. We never did see any of our planes shot down. They took them to another area for that. But they say it saved lots of lives because the plane could maneuver, dodge the bursts of anti-aircraft gun or bursts from another plane. And so a lot of pilots learned to be evasive, even to try to evade bursts of anti-aircraft gun. Well, the war ended. Culver, with its experience in flyable aircraft, we produced a new tricycle low-wing monoplane that had a much bigger engine than our previous. It had a 225 horsepower Lycoming engine, whereas the previous planes just had 125 horsepower. The plane designed by the Navy to house that mechanism was a very long, thin wing. They wanted that so that it was there would be more to shoot at. And we made an Army version and a Navy version. I think the Army version was called a PQ-13, pilotless Q for drone, I guess. And that was an exciting venture because the Navy were in there supervising every bit of the aircraft, and I was working in final assembly, putting all the parts together, and that was a choice position because you got to see how everything worked. Well, now back to Chicago. Or back to Detroit. My job as master of ceremonies was to get the bookings. So I visited railroad stations, radio stations, civic clubs like Kiwanis and Rotary and Exchange and Lions. And I get the most interesting reaction when they'd say, "And how much is this going to cost us?" You get a full chorus of excellent voices. For the club, they wanted to know how much it was going to cost. I said, not a thing. We just want you to ask these chorus members why they're out here and what they're doing and how long is their mission and who's paying their expenses. It was a great opportunity to meet businessmen and school teachers and encourage them to ask questions of the missionaries. Eventually, my wife Sherry and I were thinking about moving back to Provo again. And Cobra Aircraft had a highly desirable new airplane, and they asked me to stay, and I said, I'm called by my hometown and by an opportunity out there. I said, my wife's father is a lawyer, Ike Brockbank in Provo, a very outstanding lawyer. And he has offered me a partnership if I will come out and go to law school and pass the bar. Now that seemed like a golden opportunity. So we applied to law school at University of Utah, got accepted, and by that time we had 2 children. We loaded them in our own car and drove them out to Provo, or to Salt Lake, actually. I got a job afternoons with an organization that called itself a wholesale jeweler called the F.C. Dankin Company. That has a family connection too. The manager there was married to my wife's older sister. So I had a built-in to get that job at good pay, afternoons. And that was a great blessing. Law school was difficult for me. It was a different method of learning. Case method. You'd read a case in the book and try to brief the case, identify the chief tenets in the, and end up with a written brief of each case. And be called on in law school to stand up and read your brief. So those were good experiences.
We got about 5 more minutes.
Okay. Thank you. Well, let's again fast forward. I became a juvenile court judge by appointment. A little insight. My wife's aunt, Edith Y. Booth, granddaughter of Brigham Young, she was chairman of the Utah County Republicans, and on the board of the Salt Lake Republicans. So she knew how to pull some pressure and get me appointed. So I'm hoping that my qualifications counted something. A little behind the scenes work counted a lot by my wife's aunt. 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes.
I left the juvenile court and took a partner job with my wife's father. Great opportunity. I took a position teaching sociology at BYU. And it seemed to me that all of the good ideas that I had for juvenile court took money. And I attended a conference in Pittsburgh by an outstanding Judge Gus Schramm, who had a citizens committee helping him raise funds. And I watched that committee and came back to Provo and organized a juvenile court advisory council. And I really saw things happen. The chairman was the then manager of Sears in Provo, and he was a genius at delegating his authority. In a meeting, he would say, "So we want to form a citizenship training group to provide youth with directed juvenile youth therapy. This Sears man would point to someone and say, would you look for a place for our therapy programs? It was called the Citizenship Training Group. The next meeting that man spoke at said, I've located the Page School, which has been vacated, and we can get it for free. And it has its own gym so the kids can work out their therapy. So time after time, things like that happen. Finally, one of the BYU professors said, we ought to make a grant application to the Children's Bureau in Washington to study the work of the Citizenship Training Group, of the Advisory Council. And to make a long story short, they awarded us $50,000 to do what they called make a plan of how that committee works. And I got a call from the Children's Bureau, said, we just don't have money for a program of that kind, though it has great merit. But we do have money in the Fulbright account. Would you be willing to accept a grant to put that curriculum study together? Would I? I had recently just started as a professor of sociology at BYU, and they could not believe that I had a Fulbright grant in my first month of being there. Well, that story can be repeated. There was lots of money available, lots of grants made, and I guess I could stop there.
Thank you. Don't you want to tell us about your most famous case in juvenile court?
Oh, yes. I'm often asked about some success stories in juvenile court. A young chemistry student at Provo High had found out that if you get some potassium iodide crystals and put them on concrete, when someone steps on them, they'll explode. Well, he did that on the steps of Provo High School, and a teacher came along and stepped on, and the explosion blew off her nylons. And that didn't please her, so he was referred to the juvenile court. Well, I'm pleased to say that he continued his interest in chemistry, and he founded the U.S. synthetic diamond company, making small diamonds that are coated on the machinery that digs the oil wells. And he sold the company for several $1 million. And he goes regularly to Kenya to help plant trees to feed the market he has for palm oil, so that it can be used to provide jobs for Kenyans. And that's
Thank you.
anyway, thanks for listening.